Marriage is often talked about as if it's all about love and understanding. But anyone who has been married long enough knows one funny truth. A lot of marital arguments start over the tiniest things. Not money, not work, but things like who ate the last French fry, who left the kitchen cabinet door open, or why the air conditioner is always set to an absolutely unbearable temperature. In this video, we're going to explore 31 of the dumbest complaints married couples have made about each other. And by the end, you may realize your own marriage is actually pretty normal. Story 1. Angry about something that happened in a dream. One normal morning, a husband wakes up and immediately feels that something is wrong. Not because of the alarm clock, not because the coffee ran out, but because his wife is staring at him with that look that says, "You know what you did?" The problem is, he has absolutely no idea. After a few tense minutes, the truth finally comes out. In a dream the night before, he apparently did something very terrible. According to his wife, his dream version bought the wrong kind of milk, talked a little too friendly with a stranger, and even left her at the supermarket. He tries to explain that he doesn't even remember the dream, let alone control it. But clearly logic isn't helping here. In the end, he still has to apologize for the actions of an imaginary version of himself operating somewhere in his subconscious. Welcome to marriage. Story 2. French fry tax. One husband said that marriage comes with a special kind of tax that no government has ever officially announced: the French fry tax. Every time they stop by a drive-thru, he always asks his wife, "Do you want fries?" And the answer is always very confident, "No, I'm not hungry." So of course he only orders one portion for himself. But the strange part happens the moment the food bag opens. Out of nowhere, a hand appears, gently takes one fry, then another one, and then a few more just to taste. Before he even realizes it, almost half of his fries are gone. When he asks why she didn't just order her own portion, his wife simply says, "Yours taste better." In the end, he learned one important lesson about marriage: if your wife says she isn't hungry, order 2 fries anyway. Not because she needs them, but because the French fry tax is always collected right on time. Story 3. Would you still love me if I was a worm? One peaceful evening, a husband and wife are sitting together relaxing when the wife suddenly asks a completely hypothetical question. "If I turned into a worm, would you still love me?" The husband, using his natural logic mode, immediately tries to analyze the situation. He asks, "You mean a real worm? Would you still be able to talk? Or would I be a worm too?" Mistake, a very big mistake. His wife was not looking for a scientific discussion about biology and interspecies communication. She just wanted a simple answer with some emotion behind it. But instead, the husband starts investigating the details of the imaginary scenario. As a result, he is found guilty of being unromantic and apparently hesitating to love a worm. The lesson in marriage is simple. Some questions do not need logic, do not need analysis, and definitely do not need follow-up questions. You just answer quickly. Of course I would. Story 4. Not replacing the toilet paper. One wife complains that her husband has a very special habit when it comes to toilet paper. According to her, he seems to follow a secret rule. The roll only gets replaced when there is absolutely no other option left. This means he often leaves exactly one final sheet on the roll. Not 2 sheets, not 3, but one thin little piece clinging to the cardboard tube like a tiny white flag. To him, the roll is technically not empty yet because there is still one sheet left. But to his wife, it is just a very clear sign that he avoided the responsibility of replacing the roll. And when that final sheet finally disappears, he simply places a new roll on the shelf nearby instead of putting it on the holder. Every time she sees that his wife wonders, it takes about 4 seconds to replace a toilet paper roll. Why does it seem so difficult? Story 5. The snooze alarm. One husband complains that mornings in his house feel like an alarm clock concert. His wife does not set just one alarm, but 8 different alarms, each about 5 minutes apart. The first one rings at 5:30 a.m. She turns it off and goes back to sleep. 5 minutes later, the second alarm rings, then the third, the fourth, and it just keeps going. The funny part is, the only person who actually wakes up from this entire alarm marathon is him. Meanwhile, his wife keeps sleeping peacefully, almost completely immune to the sound. After about 90 minutes of constant alarms, he is fully awake, staring at the ceiling in quiet despair. When his wife finally wakes up, she casually asks, "Why are you up so early?" At that moment, he just sighs and realizes that in the battle with the snooze button, The person who loses is usually the one who never pressed it. Story 6. Choosing a movie on Netflix. One husband complained that watching Netflix in marriage is not really about watching a movie. It is more like a very long meeting. Everything begins when the couple sits down on the couch and says, "Let's watch something." It sounds simple, but then they start scrolling through hundreds of options. Every movie has to pass a full inspection. What is the story about? Who are the actors? Is it too violent? Is it too sad? And most importantly, is it actually worth watching? After nearly an hour of debating and reading descriptions, they finally manage to choose a movie. The husband sighs with relief like he just completed a difficult mission. But about 5 minutes after the movie starts, he turns his head and sees that his wife is already fast asleep on the couch. That is when he realizes the hardest part of the evening was never watching the movie. It was choosing the movie. Story 7. The fridge blindness problem. One husband insists that in marriage there is a strange phenomenon called fridge blindness, and apparently it only happens to men. One evening he opens the refrigerator, looks around for a moment, and confidently announces, "We're out of ketchup." His wife, standing nearby, simply sighs, walks over and reaches into the fridge. In less than 2 seconds, she pulls out the exact bottle of ketchup he just claimed did not exist. It is sitting right in the middle shelf, almost exactly at eye level. The husband immediately protests and argues that the bottle must have just appeared. According to him, it was definitely not there before. His wife just gives him that familiar look and places the ketchup bottle on the table. From that moment on, she creates a simple household rule: if the husband says something is missing in the fridge, check one more time. Because chances are, it is sitting right in front of his face. Story 8. The keys in his hand. One rushed morning, a husband runs around the house looking for his car keys. He checks his jacket pockets, looks on the kitchen counter, searches under the couch, and eventually turns to his wife with a slightly panicked voice. "Have you seen my keys anywhere?" After about 10 minutes of searching, he becomes completely convinced that someone must have moved them. And of course, the first suspect is his wife. While he continues turning the living room upside down, his wife simply stands there watching for a moment. Finally, she walks over, looks at his hand, and calmly says, "Your keys are in your hand." The husband looks down and realizes he has been holding them the entire time like a stress ball. Instead of feeling embarrassed, he immediately comes up with a brand new complaint. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" And that is the moment his wife realizes that sometimes the real problem is not finding something. It is admitting you were looking in the wrong way. Story 9. You pick the restaurant. One husband says that in marriage there is one sentence that sounds very freeing but is actually extremely risky. You pick the restaurant. It sounds like he suddenly has complete control over dinner plans. So he starts suggesting a few familiar options: pizza, sushi, or Mexican food. But interestingly, each suggestion gets rejected very quickly. Pizza is something we had recently. Sushi is not really the vibe today, and Mexican food is a little too heavy. The husband slowly realizes that his real job is not choosing a restaurant. His job is guessing the restaurant his wife already picked in her mind. After about 10 minutes of thinking and offering several more failed options, he finally pulls the car into a parking lot and says he will not drive anywhere until he gets a clear answer. In the end, they choose a place that she could have just said from the very beginning. Story 10. The 2 a.m. question. One husband says that some conversations in marriage happen at very confusing times. For example, 2 a.m. One night while he is sleeping peacefully, his wife gently wakes him up and asks a completely unexpected question. "If we were in a zombie apocalypse and I got bitten, would you shoot me?" The husband, still half asleep, tries to think quickly. He assumes this is a survival strategy question, so he begins analyzing it. If he does not do it, both of them might be in danger. Big mistake. A very big mistake. His wife was not looking for a logical survival plan. She just wanted to hear that he would protect her no matter what. So from a random midnight question, the husband now has to spend several minutes explaining that he still loves her very much. And eventually, they both go back to sleep as if nothing ever happened. Story 11. The thermostat war. One husband says that in his house there is a war with no gunfire, but it happens almost every day. The thermostat war. He prefers cool temperatures, the kind where you walk into the house and instantly feel refreshed, like stepping into a perfectly air-conditioned room. But his wife is the complete opposite. She prefers it warm, so warm that sometimes he feels like he is living in a tropical resort in the middle of summer. So the thermostat on the wall becomes the center of a silent battle of strategy. He lowers the temperature, and a few minutes later it mysteriously goes back up. Sometimes he even suspects the machine is changing by itself until he notices his wife walking past it with a very calm expression. Eventually, he realizes that in marriage, one house sometimes has to hold two different climates. One person wears a t-shirt and still feels cool. The other is wrapped in a blanket asking, "Why is the house so cold?" Story 12. We need to talk. One normal morning, a husband is at work when his phone suddenly buzzes. The text from his wife contains only 4 short words. "We need to talk," and then silence. No extra explanation, no exclamation point, just that. Within seconds, his brain starts moving faster than high-speed internet. He begins replaying everything he has done over the past week. Did he forget some important anniversary? Did he say something wrong last night? Or worse, did he eat all the food in the fridge? The scariest part is his wife doesn't reply to any more messages for hours because she is busy in meetings. By the afternoon, when she finally calls back, he has basically prepared an apology speech for 3 different crimes. But it turns out she only wanted to remind him of one very simple thing. On your way home, don't forget to buy milk. And that is when he realizes that sometimes a husband's imagination is scarier than reality. Story 13. Decorative pillows on the bed. One husband complains that the bed in his bedroom looks more like a pillow showroom than a place to sleep. Every morning, his wife carefully arranges all kinds of decorative pillows in different sizes and colors. It looks beautiful, like something from an interior design magazine. But the problem is that at night, all those pillows are still on the bed. So before he can sleep, he has to complete a familiar mission pillow removal. One after another, he moves them to a chair, to the floor, or anywhere with a little empty space. One night, he even counted them and realized that there were so many pillows it felt like he was dismantling a soft wall. By the time the bed is finally clear enough to lie down, he is already a little tired. And every night he asks himself one very simple question: if these pillows are not meant for sleeping, what exactly are they for? Story 14. IKEA without reading the instructions. One wife complains that her husband has one very strong belief. He believes he can assemble any piece of IKEA furniture without reading the instructions. According to him, those little paper manuals are only for people who lack technical instinct. So when the big box arrives home, he immediately starts building with absolute confidence. For the first few hours, everything seems fine, but little by little, extra screws start appearing. A few wooden pieces begin looking like they are in the wrong place, and the cabinet starts leaning just a little to one side. When his wife gently asks whether he wants to check the instructions, he immediately insists that the extra screws are definitely backup screws. In the end, the cabinet does stay standing, although it looks a little bit like a piece of modern art. And even now, he still insists that he built it correctly. IKEA just designed it a little weird. Story 15. The Instagram photo shoot. One husband complains that sometimes he feels like he is not a husband, but a full-time photographer for his wife. It usually begins very simply when they go out for dinner or take a walk. His wife casually says, "Can you take a few photos for me?" But experience has taught him that a few photos in marriage rarely means just a few photos. So he starts taking pictures. Left angle, right angle, standing pose, sitting pose, then trying different lighting. After every round of photos, his wife checks them and says, this angle isn't quite right. Let's try again." Meanwhile, the food on the table slowly gets colder, and the husband starts feeling like he is participating in a professional photo shoot. Finally, after about 50 photos and many pose adjustments, they choose one photo that is good enough. At that moment, he sighs with relief and realizes that sometimes the hardest part of the evening is not dinner. It is getting the perfect photo for Instagram. Story 16. Hiding in the bathroom. One wife complains that her husband has a very suspicious habit. Every time he says, "I'm going to take a quick shower," he disappears into the bathroom for at least 40 minutes. At first, she assumes he is just taking a very thorough shower. But one day she notices something strange. The water is not even running. After observing a few more times, she finally discovers the truth. The bathroom is actually his quiet little resort. In there, no one asks him to open a jam jar. No one asks him to find the TV remote. And no chore list suddenly appears. He just sits there holding his phone, enjoying a few rare minutes of peace and quiet. When his wife asks why he stays in there so long, he simply answers, "I'm preparing myself mentally." And from that moment, she understands that sometimes the bathroom in a marriage is not just a place to shower. It is also a strategic hiding spot for husbands. Story 17. Google Maps versus wife. One wife complains that even though she has lived in that town for more than 10 years, her husband still trusts Google Maps more than her. Every time they go somewhere, she confidently says, "Turn left at the next street. This way is faster." But the husband just looks at his phone and replies, "The app says turn right." So he follows the voice from the phone instead of the person sitting right next to him. The problem is, Google Maps sometimes leads them into long detours or even traffic jams. Meanwhile, his wife knows a small shortcut in the back streets that could save 10 minutes. When they finally arrive later than expected, she simply looks at him and says, "See," but he still insists that the app is just recalculating the route. And from that moment on, every trip in their family has 3 participants: the husband, the wife, and Google Maps. Story 18. I'm fine. One husband once said that in marriage there are 2 phrases that make men nervous. The first one is, "We need to talk," and the second one, which is somehow even more terrifying, is "I'm fine." It sounds completely normal, but in his experience, when his wife says it in that strangely calm voice, it is basically a warning signal. At that moment, he already knows that something is wrong. He just does not know yet what he did wrong. He tries asking again if something is bothering her, but the answer is still just nothing. Meanwhile, the way she closes the kitchen cabinets starts sounding a little more aggressive, and the clatter of dishes begins to feel like rehearsal for a rock band. Eventually, he realizes that "I'm fine" is sometimes not a statement. It is a test, and his job is to somehow figure out the correct answer on his own. Story 19. The song-skipping husband. One wife complains that every car ride with her husband feels like listening to the radio, except the DJ has absolutely no patience. The moment a song begins, her husband is already pressing skip. Usually this happens before the song even reaches the best part. She is just about to sing along to the chorus. Click, a new song is already playing. According to him, he is simply finding the right vibe for the drive. But after 10 songs get skipped within just a few minutes, his wife starts feeling like the trip is a playlist on fast forward. One time she finally asks, "Can you just let one song play until the end?" He answers very confidently, "If the song is good enough, I won't skip it." And that is when she realizes his definition of good enough apparently lasts about 30 seconds. Story 20. Talking while the blender is on. One husband complains that his wife has a very special sense of timing. She always begins telling a long story at the exact moment he turns on the blender. The situation is always the same. He walks into the kitchen to make a quick smoothie. The moment the blender starts roaring like an airplane taking off, his wife immediately begins explaining a very detailed story about her day. He cannot hear anything except the loud vrrrr of the blender, but he still has to stand there nodding, as if he understands every word. Sometimes he tries to say, "What?" but the blender completely swallows his question. When the machine finally stops, his wife looks at him and asks, "Did you hear what I said?" At that moment, he has to answer very carefully. If he says he did not hear it, she might ask why he was not paying attention. But if he says he did hear it, he can only hope the story did not end with a question. Story 21. Gaming while watching the kids. One wife complains that her husband has a very flexible definition of watching the kids. One afternoon, she needs to go out for a while and asks if he can stay home with the children. He confidently says, "No problem. Go ahead." When she returns about an hour later, the scene in the house looks a bit like a small party. The kids are eating cookies on the living room floor. Toys are scattered everywhere, and the husband is sitting on the couch holding a game controller with intense focus. When his wife asks what he is doing, he calmly replies, "I am watching the kids." According to his logic, as long as the kids are still in the house, no one is crying, and nothing is on fire, then the mission has been completed pretty successfully. But for his wife, watching the kids means actually paying attention to them, not simply making sure they still exist in the same house. Story 22. Never asking for directions. One wife complains that her husband has a very firm rule. When it comes to driving, he will not ask for directions. Ever. This becomes especially obvious whenever they arrive at a crowded parking lot. Instead of choosing an empty spot a few rows away from the entrance, he decides to drive around looking for the perfect spot right near the door. At first, his wife thinks he is just taking a quick look, But after 10 minutes of circling around, she begins to realize this is starting to feel like a personal mission. Meanwhile, there are at least 5 empty spots farther away that they have already passed several times. When she suggests parking there and walking for 1 extra minute, he immediately refuses. According to him, parking far away feels like admitting defeat. And in the end, they spend more time looking for a parking spot than actually being inside the store. Story 23. The TV remote. One husband complains that in their living room there is a small object that holds more power than anything else. The TV remote. Every evening when they both sit down on the couch, the familiar question appears. What should we watch tonight? The problem is, they rarely want to watch the same thing. The husband prefers sports or action movies, while his wife likes reality shows or light relaxing films. So the TV remote becomes the center of a quiet battle of strategy. Sometimes he switches to a channel he likes, and a few minutes later his wife calmly picks up the remote and changes it to something else. At times they even end up holding the remote like it is a championship trophy. In the end, they usually compromise by watching a show that neither of them really wanted to watch, and the remote gets placed back on the table ready for the next round of debate the following night. Story 24. The closet takeover. One husband complains that when they first moved into their house, the closet space was divided very fairly. Half for him, half for his wife. Sounds reasonable, but over time, that balance started changing in a rather mysterious way. At first it was just a few extra jackets, then a few pairs of shoes, then a few boxes of accessories. Slowly his wife's clothes began taking over almost the entire closet. One day he opens the door and realizes his section has been reduced to a tiny corner, just big enough to hang a few shirts. When he mentions it, his wife looks at the closet packed with clothes and still says the familiar line, "I still have nothing to wear." What surprises him the most is that even though the closet is nearly full every time they go out, she still feels like she needs something new. And that is when he begins to suspect that in marriage, a closet somehow keeps getting bigger, but only for one person. Story 25. The hidden Amazon packages. One husband complains that in his house there is a very mysterious phenomenon. New clothes keep appearing in the closet, but he never remembers seeing them being delivered. After a while, he starts suspecting that his wife has developed a very clever strategy. She watches the delivery app on her phone and knows exactly when the delivery truck is about to arrive. The moment the package is placed at the front door, she quickly brings it inside before he even has a chance to see it. The boxes then disappear into the bedroom, and a few days later, he suddenly notices a brand new shirt hanging in the closet. When he asks about it, his wife calmly says, "Oh, I bought this a long time ago." The most confusing part is that he has absolutely no way to prove otherwise. And eventually, he has to admit that his wife is not only good at shopping, she is also very good at secret operations. Story 26. A new hobby every 6 months. One wife complains that her husband has a very interesting cycle when it comes to new hobbies. About every 6 months, he discovers a brand new passion of his life. The first one was brewing craft beer at home. He bought all kinds of equipment and said he would soon become an expert. But only a few weeks later, the brewing kit was quietly sitting in the corner of the garage. Then he moved on to kayaking, then woodworking, and most recently beekeeping. Every time he starts a new hobby, he gets extremely excited and buys all the necessary tools. But before the project really gets going, he has already moved on to another idea that seems even more interesting. Their garage now looks like a small museum of unfinished hobbies. When his wife asks why he switches so quickly, he confidently says, "I'm exploring myself." And she just hopes the next hobby does not require buying more equipment. Story 27. You can have a bite. One husband complains that in marriage there is an offer that sounds very friendly but is actually pretty dangerous. You can have a bite. This usually happens when his wife orders a dessert that looks especially good. After a few minutes, she turns to him and generously says, "Go ahead, have a bite." The husband assumes this is a genuine invitation, so he takes a fairly serious bite, and immediately he realizes he may have made a mistake. His wife looks at the missing piece of cake with a slight expression of regret. According to him, it seems that a bite in marriage language does not mean a big bite. It means a very tiny bite, almost symbolic. From that moment on, he develops a new rule. When someone says, "Go ahead, have a bite," it is best to take one so small. It is almost invisible. Story 28. The toothpaste war. One husband says that in marriage there are big arguments, and then there are extremely small ones. For example, how to squeeze a tube of toothpaste. According to him, the only correct method is squeezing from the bottom all the way up, nice and neat. That way the toothpaste is used evenly and the tube stays straight. But his wife has a completely different approach. She squeezes right in the middle sometimes, wherever her hand happens to land. The result is a toothpaste tube that looks like it survived a small accident. Every morning when he walks into the bathroom, the husband tries to reshape the tube back to normal. But by the next day, it is squeezed into a brand new creative shape. Eventually, he decides to buy 2 separate tubes. But the strange part is that his wife still often uses his tube, and the tiny war continues. Story 29. I'll be home in 5 minutes. One wife complains that her husband has a very creative understanding of time. Whenever she texts to ask where he is, his usual reply is always the same: "I'll be home in 5 minutes." It sounds close enough that she often starts setting the table right away. But after a few experiences like this, she begins to realize that her husband's 5 minutes does not seem to match the 5 minutes on a clock. One time she had dinner completely ready and was waiting at home only to discover 15 minutes later that he was still at the office and had not even left the parking lot yet. When she asks why he says that, he calmly explains that he is simply optimistically estimating. According to him, if everything goes perfectly, he could get home that fast. From that moment on, his wife creates a new rule. Whenever her husband says, "I'll be home in 5 minutes," it usually means he is just about to leave the office. Story 30. Are you even listening? One wife complains that there is a very special moment to start an important conversation right when her husband is watching a football game. When the match reaches its most intense moment, she often begins telling a fairly long story about her day at work. The husband sits in front of the TV, eyes locked on the screen, while his brain tries to split its attention in half. Every now and then, he nods and says, "Yeah" or "right," hoping he is reacting at the correct moment. But then the familiar question appears: "Are you even listening to me?" That is the dangerous moment. If he says yes, she might ask what exactly he just heard. But if he admits he did not hear clearly, he gets blamed for not paying attention. So he has to deliver a very careful answer, while his brain is still trying to figure out which team just scored. Story 31. Did you actually look? One wife complains that her husband has a very special definition of searching for something. Whenever he says he has looked everywhere but still cannot find something, she already knows what is about to happen next. One morning, he stands in the middle of the living room and confidently announces that the TV remote has disappeared. He insists that he has checked every possible place. His wife simply walks over, looks around for a few seconds, and picks up the remote right from the table in front of him. It had been there the entire time he was searching. The funny part is, this does not only happen with the TV remote. It also happens with car keys, glasses, and even the phone sitting right next to him. After many situations like this, his wife creates a simple family rule when her husband says he has looked very carefully. It usually means he looked around for about 3 seconds. After hearing all 31 of these stories, you may notice something interesting in marriage. The biggest arguments rarely start with big problems. They usually begin with very small things, like French fries, a TV remote, or the correct way to squeeze a toothpaste tube. But somehow those tiny moments often become the funniest and most memorable ones. Now it's your turn. Which story on this list felt the most familiar to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this video made you laugh, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more funny stories just like these.